At the crossroads of Central and Southern Asia lie two Muslim neighbors, Pakistan and Afghanistan, nations bound by shared religion, culture, ethnicity, and history, yet divided by relentless discord and mistrust. Despite being Afghanistan's only gateway to the sea and a crucial trade partner, Pakistan has navigated a stormy relationship with its landlocked neighbor. What could have been a story of unity is marred by deep-rooted animosities, starting with the contentious Durand Line and the Afghan government's defiant Pakistan-Afghanistan campaign. This volatile dynamic between two intertwined nations continues to shape the region's destiny in unexpected and often explosive ways. Sheikh Rashid Ahmed, the Interior Minister of Pakistan, held a triumphant press conference at the Torkham crossing with Afghanistan in August 2021, following the Taliban takeover of Kabul. He declared that the Taliban's quick ascent to power would create a new bloc and increase the region's importance on a worldwide scale. Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan at the time, celebrated the Taliban's return, saying that Afghans had broken the shackles of slavery. Over 2 decades, the Afghan Taliban waged a prolonged and well-coordinated insurgency, at one point facing a US-led coalition of over 40 nations. During this period, the Taliban found sanctuary within Pakistan, particularly in areas bordering Afghanistan. Taliban leaders also established a presence in major Pakistani cities like Quetta, Peshawar, and later Karachi. Many Taliban members, including their founder, Mullah Muhammad Omar, were educated in Pakistan's Islamic religious schools, notably Darul Uloom Haqqani. Pakistan provided an environment that nurtured the Taliban's resurgence, allowing them to reorganize and launch a potent insurgency starting around 2003. Without this support, the Taliban's successful uprising would have been far less likely. However, despite this historical support, recent tensions between Pakistan and the Taliban-led Afghan government have escalated, as evidenced by Pakistan's military airstrikes in Afghanistan. While Pakistan initially viewed the Taliban's ascendance as an opportunity to solidify its influence in Afghanistan, the Taliban regime has been less cooperative than anticipated. They have adopted nationalist rhetoric to garner support within Afghanistan and are attempting to transition from a militant group to a governing body, diversifying their international relations. The Durand Line, a colonial-era boundary dividing Pashtun communities between Afghanistan and Pakistan, remains a contentious issue. Afghanistan has never formally recognized the Durand Line as a border, and the Taliban, like their predecessors, have refused to endorse it. This stance challenges Pakistan's strategic interests in Afghanistan and undermines its vision of achieving strategic depth in the region. Since 2022, militant attacks in Pakistan, particularly in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan, have surged. These attacks, primarily claimed by the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan (TTP), highlight the intertwined history of the TTP and Afghan Taliban, who have shared resources and strategies for years. Pakistan had hoped to suppress cross-Bedra Pashtun nationalism and leverage its influence over the Taliban. Still, the resurgence of militancy has backfired, creating a Pyrrhic victory where militant groups have become emboldened. The Afghan Taliban are unlikely to comply with Pakistan's demands to act against the TTP within Afghan territory, as such actions could destabilize their relations with the TTP and empower rival extremist groups like the Islamic State Khorasan Province, ISKP. The Taliban now argue, as Pakistan once did, that cross-border militancy is an internal issue for the affected country to resolve. Pakistan's military has continued its airstrikes in Afghanistan, drawing limited international criticism. These actions serve as a political signal to Pakistan's populace by framing an external enemy while deflecting from domestic issues such as demands for socio-economic reform, particularly from Pakistani Pashtuns. The Taliban government, lacking resources, a structured army, and significant international alliances, is ill-equipped to retaliate against Pakistan. Moreover, Pakistan retains substantial leverage over Afghanistan through trade routes and its long-standing role as a host for Afghan refugees. However, Pakistan's military interventions are exacerbating anti-Pakistani sentiment in Afghanistan and alienating its own Pashtun population. History demonstrates that insurgencies thrive on societal grievances, deprivation, and youth disillusionment. The bilateral relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan were doomed from the start. When Pakistan was first created as an Islamic neighboring state in 1947, the government of Afghanistan at the time was opposed to its membership in the United Nations and refused to recognize it until the Durand Line boundary dispute was settled. Pertinently earlier, when the Indian subcontinent was under British colonial rule and was not divided between India and Pakistan. A British ambassador and the Emir of Afghanistan reached an agreement in 1893 that resulted in the Durand Line. Pakistan inherited the border from the British after gaining its independence. Afghanistan, however, refused to recognize Pakistan as a successor state and withdrew from the pact. The Durand Line has not been acknowledged as a valid boundary by any Afghan administration since. Afghans believe that the British exploited the Durand Line as a colonial instrument to split Pashtuns. The Afghan Taliban has opposed Pakistan's border barrier because they view it as an unresolved issue. Skirmishes between the two armies have resulted from Afghan Taliban fighters physically intervening to disrupt the border barrier. Border checkpoints are frequently closed as a result of cross-border terrorism and the Durand Line's shadow. There have been negative effects on the flow of people and products, underscoring the obvious economic consequences of Pakistan's poor assessment of the Taliban. Afghans have consistently defended their independence, particularly in the face of outside interference. To safeguard its economic interests and preserve relations with the Afghan Taliban, Pakistan ought to have approached the border dispute more tactfully. Afghan claims extend to the Pashtun areas of Pakistan, including the tribal areas and other Pashtun-dominant areas of the former Northwest Frontier Provinces, NWFP, which are now Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, KP. The Afghan government rejects the Durand Line as Pakistan's international border. In what was formerly the NWFP but is now the KP, the Red Shirts, political supporters of the Indian National Congress, formed the coalition government. The Red Shirts boycotted the vote, as the NWFP voters were presented with a referendum that circumvented the province government and offered them the option of joining India or Pakistan. The Khudi Khidmatgar movement and the Provincial Congress passed the Banu Resolution on June 21, 1947, which called for Pakhtunistan to continue to exist as an independent country apart from Pakistan and India. This request was denied by the British government. The NWFP and the Tribal Belt were to be included in the new Pakistani Dominion following the July 1947 vote. These two Muslim nations have a shared language, culture, race, ancestry, and religion, but their relations have soured to the point of hostility. As a result, the Durand Line has never been recognized by the Afghan government as the boundary between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Goodwill between the two nations has never lasted more than a brief period of time because of this mistrust, which hindered their interactions in every way. Both Pakistan and Afghanistan allege that the other is conspiring to weaken their security by supporting terrorists who act as their agents. The TTP declared its loyalty to the Afghan Taliban and hailed them as a model after they returned to Kabul. The TTP leadership urged its members to defeat Pakistan in a manner akin to that of the Afghan Taliban against the United States. Consequently, there has been no indication of a TTP drop, and in the 2 years after the Taliban took over Kabul in August 2021, terror attacks in Pakistan have climbed by 73% compared to the same period before their takeover. The TTP now has a more organized central command, a larger presence because of mergers with other organizations, and the weapons that the United States left behind when it withdrew. It has therefore become a serious threat to the Pakistan Army. The situation for Pakistan has become even more complex as a result of the TTP's shift in operational strategies to target the military rather than civilians. Once the Pakistan Standard was introduced by Ron Paul, by increasing the stakes, the TTP's targeting of Chinese laborers, security personnel, and Chinese interests has made the situation worse for Pakistan. In addition, Having a friendly ruler in Kabul provides the TTP with an extra edge in terms of retreating to safety following strikes in Pakistan. Pakistan's leadership is at a loss for how to handle relations with the Afghan Taliban and deal with the threat posed by the TTP due to the country's polycrisis, which is the phenomena of many crises, including political, economic, and security crises at the same time. There is no pathway to how to deal with the TTP problem because of Pakistan's political unrest. The people of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa (KP) share the views of Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf (PTI) and other major religious and patriotic groups, who reject kinetic operations against the TTP. The Pakistan Army finds it difficult to carry out large-scale operations due to the aftermath of Operation Zarb-e-Az and the lack of local support. The establishment's ability to maneuver in handling the crises, particularly the TTP issue, has been severely hampered by the decline in public support following the 2024 general elections. The economic situation is another significant factor that has deterred Pakistan from initiating a kinetic offensive similar to Zarb-e-Az. The IMF authorized Pakistan's 25th bailout in September 2004. And the Pakistan Army's operational capabilities will be at risk following its withdrawal from Afghanistan if the United States does not provide tactical assistance. It has been devastating for Pakistan to permit the TTP fighters to return and participate in peace negotiations. Pakistan's desire to participate in peace negotiations was seen by the TTP as a sign of weakness. The TTP maintained its terror strikes by fortifying itself and taking advantage of Pakistan's weakness. The negotiations ultimately ended in the same disastrous way as earlier attempts to negotiate with the TTP. The strategy was faulty because the Pakistani elite failed to recognize the ideological and historical connections between the Taliban and the TTP. The conflict between Pakistan and the Taliban has intensified as a result of several measures implemented by the Pakistani government. Relations between the Taliban and Pakistan have been severely damaged by Pakistan's plan to repatriate Afghan refugees. The Taliban in Afghanistan have voiced their displeasure and cautioned Pakistan to alter its direction. The goal of repatriating refugees was to pressure the Taliban into controlling the TTP. Instead, both the Taliban administration and the Afghan people now view Pakistan negatively as a result of the approach. Pakistan also lost the little goodwill it had earned abroad for taking in the refugees. Another mistake was Pakistan's airstrikes inside Afghanistan. To discourage the TTP and convey to the Afghan Taliban its readiness to launch an offensive, Pakistan was focusing on TTP strongholds in Afghanistan. However, Pakistan's intended goal was not accomplished by the Taliban's retaliatory strike. This exchange showed Pakistan's weakness against its western neighbor in the absence of a clear win against the Taliban. Afghans developed anti-Pakistan feelings as a result of Pakistan's policy choices, which the Taliban exploited to justify their existence. Stability on an internal, regional, and international level is threatened by an ongoing crisis. Afghanistan's and Pakistan's economics, population, food security, internal instability, and governance problems are all major obstacles, but continuing or intensifying the crisis will divert their focus from these urgent issues or make matters worse. Pakistan's decision to repatriate Afghan refugees, for example, will take funds away from the Afghan Taliban's domestic counter-terrorism initiatives. Militant organizations like Islamic State Khorasan Province, ISKP, may seize the chance to grow and launch terror acts in the area and beyond if relations between the Taliban and Pakistan worsen, and the two nations become preoccupied with one another. The United States and its allies continue to be concerned about the existence of organizations such as ISKP, Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent, and TTP. U.S. counter-terrorism aims would not be served by a distracted Taliban. Additionally, China would not want a distracted power in Kabul, particularly given Beijing's ongoing security concerns about the East Turkestan Islamic Movement's ETIM presence in Afghanistan. The increase in assaults against Chinese individuals and projects is due as much to Pakistan's inadequate security system as it is to the Taliban and Pakistan's lack of collaboration on counterterrorism. The militants are only strengthened when counter-terrorism measures lack unity. As a result, nobody benefits from a protracted crisis. Similarly, before the Taliban take over Afghanistan under Ashraf Ghani's administration, Afghanistan's economic ties with Pakistan have weakened, while those with India have strengthened. Afghanistan's invitation to India to train the Afghan National Army was detrimental to Pakistan's interests. The Afghan government has repeatedly requested that Pakistan open the Wagha border to Afghan cargo trucks traveling to and from India. Pakistan and Afghanistan have a lot of mistrust for one another when it comes to terrorism and counter-terrorism. Their capacity to cooperate on security concerns is constrained by competing allegations of cross-border terrorism between the two nations. Since President Ashraf Ghani entered office in September 2014, when the two countries signed a memorandum of understanding to target terrorist safe havens in both countries, there has been some improvement in the cooperation between Kabul and Islamabad. Yet the counter-terrorism cooperation was derailed by Kabul's direct claims of Pakistan's assistance in terrorist attacks on Afghanistan in August 2015. Cooperation in counter-terrorism measures has been impeded by mutual mistrust, with one side blaming the other for terrorist attacks on its soil. As a landlocked country, Afghanistan has no easy way to reach the sea. Both of Afghanistan's landlocked neighbors to the north and west are themselves landlocked. Iran in the south and Pakistan in the east are the only countries with access to the warm waters. The Islamic Republic of Iran has been subject to international sanctions ever since the revolution of 1979. Hence, Afghanistan's economic efforts and trade with the rest of the world are dependent on Pakistan, the only country with seaports. Afghanistan relies on Pakistan for sea trade, but also for food, medical care, schools, and pretty much everything else it needs to survive. Members of the same Pashtun tribe now live on both sides of the border, further connecting Afghanistan and Pakistan as a result of the Durand Line. It is Pakistan's strategic location, which makes it difficult to ignore and neglect. Pakistan recently approached the Taliban leadership in Afghanistan to acquire coal in an effort to save money, which has had a variety of impacts on Pak-Afghan relations from an economic standpoint. Sadly, after Pakistan contacted the Taliban, they agreed to triple coal's price. The Taliban regime has forgotten how this agreement may aid Afghans in overcoming their country's economic hardship and isolation from the rest of the world. The experts have offered some suggestions for ways to boost bilateral trade between the two countries, including easing investor visa requirements, lowering border barriers for goods transport, calming down the security situation, putting an end to finger-pointing, stopping cross-border terrorism, taking into account confidence-building measures from an economic standpoint, lowering customs duties on seaports, renewing trade transit agreements, and stopping the smuggling of food and other items. The two countries' strong and vibrant economic ties are essential for both Afghanistan and Pakistan. It is claimed that neighbors cannot be changed but friends can, and this is certainly true of Afghanistan and Pakistan. If neither state could escape the other, then both nations would have to come up with novel solutions to the unresolved issues that had been impeding bilateral trade. Security perspective of bilateral relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Pakistan and Afghanistan are geographically close. Foreign invaders have a long history of targeting Afghanistan. Recently, both the Soviet Union in 1979 and the United States after 9/11 attacked Afghanistan. Afghan warlords have both started and contributed to external conflicts that have harmed the Afghan people. The 2,240 kilometers of common border between the two countries is widely recognized as one of the most convoluted borders in the world. At the time the border was created, the area was shared by people with similar tribal affiliations, and so it was divided into two states. Because the international boundary lines run across mountainous terrain, protecting the border can be difficult. Militant groups have used Afghanistan as a haven since the Soviet invasion, when jihadis flocked there from all over the world seeking refuge. The Soviet Union and the United States invaded Afghanistan, resulting in a significant influx of Afghan refugees, notably into Pakistan. This caused several problems for Pakistan and worsened relations between the two countries. The US and other Western nations created militant groups in Afghanistan and gave them weapons and ammunition to fight the USSR there. Because of its proximity to Afghanistan, Pakistan was taken prisoner by these organizations, which gave rise to the Kalashnikov culture and heroin culture there. As a result, both the tribal regions of Pakistan and other areas of Pakistan as a whole were negatively impacted. The beginning of militant activity in Pakistan led to the worst kind of warfare, which the Pakistani government and military had to combat with their limited resources. After 9/11, when the US invaded Afghanistan for a second time, militant organizations that had fled the country to avoid attack by the US and her NATO allies once more turned their attention to Pakistan. Once more, they began their violent actions in Pakistan, particularly in the former Fatak and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and Pakistan had to bear the burden of being a non-NATO ally in the war against terror, WOT. The entire social structure, economic situation, foreign relations, and internal turmoil in Pakistan were severely damaged by this militancy. Due to several military operations around the nation, particularly in KP, Fatah, and Baluchistan, the economy of Pakistan was destroyed, and the country once more sank into the Dark Ages. Pakistan endured a lot of pain during the war on terror, but at the same time the United States accused it of playing a double game and demanded that it do more to put an end to militancy. Afghans did not like Pakistan either, even though Pakistan had saved their lives and given them refuge for the past 40 years. Although the Afghan situation has badly harmed Pakistan, the country has not shown its loyalty to the Afghan people or its sincerity in demanding friendly bilateral relations.